Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wahine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand.
Hello and welcome to Conversations with Wahine. Today I'm joined with Ash. How are you going, Ash?
Pretty good. The sun is shining. Getting ready to go out for a run. It's a good holiday.
Yeah, not bad for a winter weekend actually. It's been a pretty good winter, I think. It's been pretty sunny most days.
Yeah, I can think of worse ways to spend a Saturday than a nice interview and just a day in the sunshine.
Yeah, definitely. So today we are joined via Zoom with Grace Petrie, all the way from the UK. She is an English folk singer, songwriter, and guitarist from Leicester, England. She was hailed in The Guardian as a powerful new songwriting voice back in 2011. She has a unique style where she integrates comedy about whatever's happening in her life and the world into her songs. So while she's singing about serious things happening in the world, you also can't stop but have a laugh because of the way that she presents it, which is really cool and just really unique. I've never come across anything like that before. Welcome, Grace. How are you going?
Hi. Yeah, I'm really well. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's funny to hear you guys talk about the winter morning, because I'm obviously in the middle of a summer's night, so I know that's the way it works. But the novelty will never wear off for me.
Time zones are weird.
No, yeah. Thanks for joining us so late on a Friday night. I know it's really hard to organize interviews with people on the other side of the world, but I'm so glad that when it actually happens, it's so cool. Thanks to modern day technology.
I'm a bit of a night owl as well, to be honest. So I'm just kind of off. I'm always get offered kind of the very early morning or the very late night, and I will always take the very late night because I'm kind of I'm awake till 2 o'clock most days, anyways.
Wow, yeah. How do you do it? I'm in bed at 8:30.
I think it's like, is it called circadian rhythms? I think that's what it's called. It's like your natural. And even when I was a kid, when I was at school, I was still, awake till 2 o'clock in the morning. Even when I had to get up, these days I kind of have an excuse, right? Because I work in the evenings, I do shows. Even when I have kind of like very early starts, I still can't really get to sleep for 2 o'clock. So I'd much rather pick the 10 p.m. interview.
Yeah. I think I'm like that as well. I can't get up before 7 o'clock in the morning, but at night I can easily stay up till midnight, 1 o'clock watching Netflix. Not a very good habit, but I can't really help it. So, we'll kind of like get into the deep end of the questions, I guess, to start off with. You often joke and sing about being mistaken by, different people in the public for a boy, not even a man, but a young boy, and you're in your 30s. So while you do openly joke about this, and, I've been to the Guilty Feminist and seen you do these songs live, it can be funny, but at the same time, to you, it could be quite insulting and hurtful. How do you make yourself feel better when people mistake you for this? And do you say anything to them to educate them or to make them know that what they've said is wrong?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess as you touched on there, I tend to sort of use humor, I suppose, to be the best way to respond to that. I mean, it's funny because I only got my hair cut short when I was 21. All the way through the high school, I had really, really, really long hair, and it's funny because I really hated having long hair. I always knew that this was very much who I was, but I had this really kind of shameful sense that if I cut my hair, people would mistake me for a boy, and I kind of carried this fear around for years and years and years, and then I finally, when I was 21, finally cut my hair short, and what I found is people do mistake me for a boy all the time, but also it's just not that big a deal. I guess the kind of cost of living inauthentically in terms of my, I guess, kind of expression of who I am as a butch lesbian and stuff, I think the cost of the kind of freedom of living authentically is so much more than the cost of people occasionally. And it's funny because people invariably are more embarrassed than I am. You know, when people mistake me for a boy, they act like it's the worst thing in the world, right? And I think it's interesting that like I have two nieces who are 10 and just nearly 8 years old. And it's really interesting seeing an entirely new generation kind of come up and actually really not have these same hang-ups about clothes and hair, meaning that you are or aren't one gender. You know, I think that's something that when I was a kid, I remember much more being like, oh, are you a boy or a girl? And actually with my nieces and all of their friends, it just kind of isn't something that's really necessarily on their radar as much. I don't think it's in their kind of consciousness as much as it was. So I like to think things are getting better. But I find that because, you know, people, as I say, get so embarrassed about it. And I, you know, like it kind of bounces off me now. Like I mean, I find the confusion over my age a lot funnier than the confusion over my gender because, as you say, I mean, it is literally like I've been mistaken for like a 13-year-old boy, and I just turned 37, so I'm well. I appreciate you saying I'm in my 30s. I'm well into my 30s now. You know, I'm looking down the barrel of my 40s here. So you know, I think sometimes like it's like I do take those opportunities to go, oh, you know, it's interesting that you kind of gendered me in this scenario, and like that's something to think about. I do sort of try and have those conversations with people gently, but I find that because they invariably are so mortified, I find it an easier way of dealing with it to just kind of like have a laugh about it, because we have to have a laugh about it, right? You know, I mean, people come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and gender expressions, and I think to move to a point where we just categorize each other less, or we don't categorize each other because we really don't need to. That's a future that I see on the horizon, and I very much welcome it coming in, you know.
Yeah, I love that. I have two nephews, three nephews, but two are a similar age to that, and I completely agree. I think you have a lot more fluidity with the next generation, which is really refreshing to see. So, I hope that it's not just that they're at that preteen stage, and I hope it continues as they get older. But yeah, it's a nice change to not have that hang up and insecurity I think that we carried as teenagers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, things are, even though obviously I think some of the headlines that we see around these conversations are so negative, right? But you know, I think it's important to realize as well that broadly speaking, I think things are moving in a more progressive direction. You know, I mean, I think things like, you know, like Harry Styles, right, turning up to the Met
Yeah.
Gala in like these gorgeous, like incredible ball gowns. That is actually impossible to imagine, you know, when I was a teenager, and to see somebody of his kind of fame and like cool status among young people just completely like rejecting those binaries and boundaries is such a positive thing, you know. And I think it's so easy, I think, when we're immersed in politics to kind of focus on these kind of minority of voices that are saying really regressive things. But I do really believe that the wider conversation is moving very much in the right direction.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's what area you're listening to. And like you say, in politics, you definitely hear very much one voice that's often very loud.
Definitely.
I also wanted to ask, we interviewed Deborah Francis White a couple
Yeah.
months back on our podcast, which was great. And a lot of people will know you from The Guilty Feminist. What was your experience of working with Deborah and being on tour with her? What's that like?
Like she's one of my best friends, you know, and the Guilty Feminist is a gorgeous thing to be a part of. And I mean, I have not, I don't have enough time in the world to say the things that I love and respect about her. I think she's a force of nature. You know, I've kind of never met anyone like her. And I think the things that she has done with the podcast, you know, not just in terms of comedy and like, you know, in the UK, I think it's really been an amazing game changer for women in comedy. And I think that it's really massively leveled the playing field in lots of ways. You know, it became this kind of, the podcast itself became this cultural heavyweight, you know, that was really getting these female comics, you know, the audiences that they absolutely deserved, but they had for a long time been quite denied. but also in terms of the way that she, you know, mobilizes and inspires the fan base to do amazing things. You know, like, you know, she's had Guilty Feminist listeners, you know, go out to Calais and volunteer in the jungle and like take refugees into their homes. You know, there's really genuinely been like lives changed by the podcast, and that is all completely down to the fact that she is exceptionally focused and like in some ways like single-minded on improving life, you know what I mean? And I think those are the people that really change the world, you know. I mean, I think it's like, I know it's like a kind of cliche it's like a cliched quote, isn't it, that you know, it's like is it like the unreasonable person like sees the world not being the way that it should be and like refuses to like accept it and will change the world to their own. And I feel like she's an amazing example of that. Like she kind of sort of looked at comedy and was like, yeah, this isn't serving everybody and we're not even getting the best comedy to the right audiences that we could. So she just kind of changed the game. And I feel like she has exactly the same kind of inexhaustible passion for politics and activism that I admire to the ends of the earth. And also she's just amazing fun, you know, like we've toured Australia and New Zealand a few times together now, and I've toured with the podcast in the UK as well, and it's just such a laugh, you know. Like, it's, for me, it's kind of, it doesn't really feel like work. I feel like I just get paid to go on holiday with one of my best friends for like a month and, you know, have amazing conversations every day and night, you know. So yeah, she's a very, very, very special friend of mine, and I'm still just honored and delighted to be involved with the Guilty Feminist in any form. Even all these years later, I'm still kind of like, wow, I can't believe I keep getting this call, you know. So I love her. Yeah, not got enough good things to say about her for sure.
Yeah. I went to her show earlier this year when you guys came to Wellington, and it was just so amazing. Like, you walk into the opera house and you just feel so uplifted, and like, you know, even in the break time, all these women that had never met each other were just talking to each other, and it was just such an awesome vibe. And like, she created that, she, along with you and all the other guests that she had on. And like you said, you know, she always finds a way to uplift women that don't really get that platform. And it's really cool how she finds like local women wherever she's performing. She gets local women from there to come on stage with her so they can talk about their mahi, because the show's not about her, it's about the people she's interviewing. Or, you know, like in Wellington, she brought up stuff that's happening in Wellington. So it's a different show every time, and it's really cool how she does that. It's also on the point of touring and being on the go. What's your favorite country to tour and why?
Oh, I mean, you know, everywhere has its own kind of individual flavor, you know, and it's kind of, it's like asking me to choose between my children. But I mean, I do really love coming to New Zealand. I mean, it's funny, like my first time over in Aotearoa, I was at we went to there's a lesbian bar, a gay bar, sorry, in Auckland. And me and Deborah came in after the show, and I swear this never happens anywhere. This never happens to me anywhere. It doesn't happen to me in my hometown. It doesn't happen to me in the UK. It doesn't happen to me in London. I never get recognized. And I walked into this bar in Auckland on the other side of the world, and the bartender was like, "Your drinks are on the house. We know who you are." And I was like, "Wow, these are my people." You know what I mean? So yeah, and I do think there's something about, like, I think, you know, Australia and New Zealand, I suppose, just because I suppose of, you know, the history of colonialism and stuff, I feel like there's a lot of the messages, I suppose, the political messages that I'm trying to get across in my music. I feel like they do kind of connect with audiences there, and I feel like there is a real appetite for political music in both Australia and New Zealand. So I love being in that part of the world. Yeah, I would say that is, it's kind of this tour is what I'm really looking forward to, because it is my favorite thing to do, you know. Don't tell Canada. That's the only place I go outside the UK.
Well, hopefully we can get you some more free drinks. That's always nice.
Yeah, it makes me sound kind of shallow, doesn't it? That was my
No.
Yeah, you know, that's all it takes. Listen, I'm a cheap date. That's all it takes for a place to be my favorite place on earth.
You mentioned a few minutes ago just about how Deborah has created this environment to really help uplift comedians and singers. I guess that's one of the big challenges. I know my husband does stand-up comedy, and it's really hard for women to break into that scene. I think it can even today still be a bit of a boys' club. How, like, do you have any advice on how to break into that scene and get started as a kind of female comedian and singer? Even though I do hate that term female comedian, it's you're just a comedian, but you know.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because I mean, in a similar way, right, to Deborah and the Guilty Feminist, a lot of people don't realize that the Guilty Feminist is an independent enterprise. It's a DIY enterprise, you know. I think because the production values are so high, and now it's kind of so successful and so popular, I think people kind of almost don't realize that it's very much a DIY operation. And I think that we live in a time that I think it's never really been more possible than it is now for you to find an audience directly through the internet. And I guess because I've always been independent, I don't have a record label, I don't have a manager, I don't have a team behind me. You know, the only thing I've ever had is an audience. And, you know, now I'm kind of whatever I am, you know, nearly 20 years into this career. Sometimes, you know, young people will say to me, you know, what would you recommend? What would you suggest? How would you recommend that I break into it? And I think, you know, my advice for them always is, you know, you can do it without anything other than the audience. Like the audience is the most important thing. And you know, there might be people who kind of there might be managers and agents and teams and people who kind of want to try and help you, but ultimately if you find people who really connect to what you do on a heart level, on a soul level, nobody can ever take that away from you. You know what I mean? And I think that independent art that is kind of free of, you know, the gatekeepers and the tastemakers of industries, I think is it's never been a more fertile time for that. You know, I mean, I feel like so blessed to have the audience that I have, but I feel so blessed to live in the time that I have lived in where I have the internet, I have the ability to publish my own music, and there is nobody giving me permission to do that or withholding permission to do that. And the truth is, for somebody like me, you know, if I'd have been born 20 years earlier, I just wouldn't have had this career. I wouldn't have been able to make a go of this because, you know, it was a very small number of people who decided who got to have record deals and who got to be musicians. And that isn't true anymore. And I think um, that I think in some ways that's massively leveled the playing field, you know, for women and queer artists and artists of color and any other kind of marginalization of people who in the past, you know, would have needed to impress the right people, you know, and those people who were making those decisions had all of those kinds of biases and, you know, misogyny, white supremacy, homophobia, all of these things. So I feel like put the audience at the heart of what you're doing. That would always be my advice to anybody, because I think, you know, now we live in this incredible technological era. There will be people out there somewhere in the world who like what you do and who connect to what you do. And if you find those people, that's all you need. You know, you can't do it without them. You can do it without almost anything else. You can do it without, you know, glossy press materials. You can do it without expensive videos. You can do it without, you know, a £10,000 record studio. You can do it without. The only thing you can't do it without is the people listening and connecting to what you do. So I'd always say, for me, like that's what's at the heart of what I do. I would say always, and that would be my advice to anyone.
It's almost just going back to the pure raw intention of the art, you know, as long as you have your audience, that's all that matters, and you don't have that, as you say, the gatekeeping and potential exploitation. It's just yours and you're in control of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, you know, because we again I'm kind of going on about technology, but we live in this time where we can make things of exceptionally high quality, you know, ourselves. You know, and I think again, like Deborah and the Guilty Feminist is just an incredible example of that. You know, like that was just a podcast that she just had this idea. You know, she was just like, I guess I feel like I sometimes I feel like I'm not doing feminism very well. I wonder if anyone else feels the same way. She took a microphone, she had a go, people loved it, people really connected to it. And now it is what it is. It's like one of the most powerful institutions of comedy in the UK. And I think that that is an incredible example.
Yeah. And she says quite often, like, a podcast is something that no one can stop you from making. It's like she compares it to the radio, right? Whereas on the radio, you're gatekept by all these rules and producers, but a podcast, anyone can go out and make and publish. And that tends to be something that women do a lot more of, because women have, more to say that fits outside the box. I'm not saying it the way she says it, but yeah, she says it quite often in her podcast. And I'm like, that's so true, because I think even with us, like with Conversations with Wahine, we just started this podcast and kind of did it our own way. And yeah, and no one can stop you because you're publishing it yourself on a podcast app. It's not going through, big radio companies and, big broadcasters. Mm. And with the internet,
I think it's so important. Sorry.
yeah, and also, with the internet, you can reach so many people in different parts of the world just by using Zoom, Facebook, social media. It's everything so easily accessible now, just like you said. So, your way of approaching comedy and singing are both quite unique, because you weave political satire and comedy and things that are happening in your life into your songs. So, the way you deliver all your comedy is through song. How did you get into doing it that way? And, like, what made you decide that was the way you wanted to present your work?
It was a complete accident. There's never been a plan. Never mistake anything that I'm doing as being intentional. So essentially, so way back in 2012, 12 years ago, I was asked to support Josie Long, who is a dear friend of mine, a wonderful stand-up comedian, and she asked me to support her on a UK tour. And I'd never worked in comedy in my life, and didn't really know what I was doing. And I went out there, and I remember the first night she brought me on stage to open up the show, and there was this guy in the front row, and he just crossed his arms and he sat there and he looked really angry for the entirety of my set. And I realized, oh, these people haven't come to see music, right? They've come to see comedy. So the next day, I just had a go at making a couple of jokes in between songs, right? And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I thought it just broke the ice a bit. And I think sometimes, particularly when you're singing about politics, protest songs, right? They can be a little bit I don't know, like it can be misinterpreted as quite po-faced, right? Or like you take yourself very seriously. And I've always found that using humor in between those songs, I think that it opens people up more to maybe be a bit more receptive to those political messages. I've had people say to me before, like, "Oh, you had me laughing, and then 2 minutes later you had me crying." And I think those things are really related. I think if you're laughing, you're open, right? I think comedy is a great way of like cracking us open. And I know that with me, some of the best comedy that I've ever seen has been the comedy that has had me, also crying at various points in the show. I think that those two emotions are really closely linked to each other. So I just kind of discovered through gigging with lots of comics, I kind of discovered this sort of hybrid, weird like way that I have of playing shows where, it kind of has become almost like 50% comedy, 50% music, because I found that it just allowed me sometimes to get to those places in people's heads and in their hearts, that they maybe their defenses were a bit down. I feel like if I go out there with a guitar and I say at the top of the show, listen, I'm a lesbian and I'm a socialist and I'm a feminist and I'm going to sing all these songs about politics, I do feel like it makes people go, oh no, we're going to be told off. And I think if I am able to just say to people, hey, I can have a laugh at myself and you can have a laugh at yourself, and we're here for joy and you're here for entertainment and we're here for a good time. And if you can just show them that it's not all doom and gloom, and you can have a joke with them, I find that people lower their guard, and then invariably they are so much more receptive to actually hearing what you've got to say. And sometimes those things that I am going to say that are political, sometimes they are tricky for audiences to hear. Sometimes I am in some ways like calling out things that these audiences have sort of partaken in. but I've had 100% more success, by taking the time to engage with them comedically and get them on my side first, than if I go out and just say, well, I'm going to sing a song that's really angry. Then I find I've lost them before I've started, right? So it's kind of maybe it sounds a bit cynical in some ways, but I think I sort of developed this kind of comedy music hybrid in an attempt, I suppose, to try and sort of sugar those political messages in such a way that I could sneak them under people's radar a little bit, you know?
It's like that saying, was it like a spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down? It is just using comedy to engage people and bring them on board.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's exactly that. Yeah, a spoonful of comedy helps the folk music go down.
And then when you're doing shows, like as you say, it can be hard with those political topics for some people. Do you prefer doing it as a solo show where your audience know exactly what they're coming for, or a bigger show like The Guilty Feminist where it's a mix of different styles and different people?
I mean, I love doing The Guilty Feminist. It's one of my favorite things that I ever do. I mean, and I think it's extremely, because the lineup is different every night, and as you said, Deborah has kind of local activists and people who are specifically relevant to the place that we're in. I find that a really inspiring way to work, and I'm so sorry, I've got this cough I can't shake. I hope I'm not deafening you guys.
Don't worry.
But I always find that a really inspiring thing to be a part of. I guess it's just different. I wouldn't say that I prefer one over the other. I mean, playing my own shows, my solo shows, you get to kind of in some ways take people on a bit of a longer journey. My headline shows, I might be with people for kind of an hour and a half, with a break in the middle. So, and it's nice sometimes for me as a musician to get to sort of stretch my legs a little bit and kind of, build a show that's, we're going to start with some really high energy songs, and we're going to go to some really kind of quiet songs in the middle, and, running the whole gamut of the various topics that I write about. A lot of people kind of, particularly, I suppose, with the Guilty Feminists, they kind of, if they are familiar with me, they might be hoping for a big political sing along, and it's kind of nice in my own solo shows to have a bit more space to do, the more quiet, intimate things that I maybe don't get much chance to do. So yeah, I'd say that they're like, I have different kinds of love for both things, but I feel really, really, really lucky that I get to do both things, and I think particularly, in Australia and New Zealand, like I have the best of both worlds, because I come out and do The Guilty Feminist, and I have this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous reception from Deborah's audience. And then a lot of them will come back and see me on my own shows when I tour solo. So it's kind of, I just it couldn't be better for me. I feel so lucky to have it work that way around.
That's really cool to hear. And you also mentioned earlier that you've been in this type of industry for about 20 years now. So, what do you know now that you wish you could have told your younger self when you were starting out as a singer and a comedian?
Yeah, so many things. I mean, I guess like the major one is very much around my own kind of identity, I suppose, as a queer person and as a lesbian, and as particularly, I suppose, as a butch lesbian. I guess we touched on this a little bit earlier on, but when I was younger, I just had so much shame around that. And I think it took me a really long time to realize that there's nothing wrong with being exactly who I am. And I think in some ways, I still feel kind of sad for my younger self that it took me such a long time to learn that. And I think I often say, I have a song called Black Tie, which is kind of a letter to my younger self, where I basically am saying to my 15-year-old self, don't worry about it. I know that right now you feel like you are all wrong, but you're exactly who you're supposed to be. And, you will achieve an age and a perspective where you realize that you actually wouldn't change who you are for the world, and this is exactly who you want to be. Not only do you not have to be ashamed, but one day you'll even celebrate this identity. You'll feel lucky to have it. So that's something that I guess I still am like, it bleeds into all things, that type of shame. And I think that kind of self that kind of internalized homophobia and internalized butch phobia, I think that bled into a lot of the way that I presented myself on stage for many years when I was, in my early 20s. I mean, I kind of often talk about Hannah Gadsby, the comedian, talking in their show Nanette, which is, I think, still on Netflix. It's incredible Emmy-winning show. And I remember seeing that for the first time and realizing that a lot of the things that they talk about the way that they had always kind of mocked themselves on stage is something that I realized that I had done for a long time, because I was sort of, kind of lampooning myself in this way that I was afraid the audience was going to lampoon me, right? So I think it took me a really long time to even realize I was doing that. So I would say that to my 18-year-old self. I would say, not only is who you are absolutely fine, but it's a beautiful thing. And actually one day there will be people who will come to your shows and tell you that you standing on stage and being exactly this person allows them to feel comfortable in that same identity. And that is, more than I ever could have hoped really to achieve with my, any type of music, or even anything I would have done with my life. I feel very privileged about that.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. And I can imagine how many people are being inspired by you. Like, they can see themselves in you, right? And that's exactly what all this representation that's been, coming out more and more as social media is becoming, more easily accessible. And like, even the same with like ethnic people, more and more brown people are starting to see themselves on TV and as politicians and this and that. And having someone in a higher up place that kind of reflects yourself makes you feel like, oh, I could be that one day, or this person's happy about who they are and I could be as well. So it's really good. It's really good to hear that, you're inspiring so many people, but along the line, like, you've become comfortable with who you are as well. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. And I agree completely that I think, again, I guess that comes back to what I was saying about the tools that we have these days as artists, and activists and influencers and politicians of all kinds, to kind of circumnavigate those gatekeepers, that in the past they really stood between us and those people who might look to us and go, oh, that person makes me feel like I could do that one day. You know what I mean? I think it just feels like a privilege to live in a time that we have that capacity to speak directly to those people.
Yep, exactly. So before we wrap up, do you want to tell our audience about your upcoming shows and where they can buy tickets?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm coming to New Zealand in October, and I'm going to be in Auckland and Christchurch and Wellington and Dunedin, which is a new one for me. So I've been into Auckland and Christchurch and Wellington before, and every time I come to New Zealand, people say to me, "You got to come to Dunedin." So Dunedin, don't let me down, guys. You've given me the impression that it's this kind of bustling metropolis of lesbian folk fans. So I'll be disappointed if that isn't the reception that I get. If I don't get a hero's welcome in Dunedin. So yeah, but all the shows are on sale now, and all the tickets are at my website, gracepetrie.com. And I'd love to see you there. Yeah, we've got plenty of tickets left.
Yeah. I'm really hoping to go along because, yeah, like you said, in The Guilty Feminist, you had a very short, you're like one part of a bigger show, and it would be so cool to just see you in a different setting, but to already kind of know what we're going to get. So I'm really looking forward to it. So if you're thinking of going, definitely go along. Tickets are definitely affordable. They're not, they're not going to cost you a fortune. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out, especially on a Friday night, to have a chat to us. It's been so lovely getting to know you a bit more and finding out more about your life.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.